I often feel with an introduction like that I shouldn't say any more and just leave and have coffee, but thanks, Tasmina, for the introduction. You know, I was just reflecting on the fact this is my university. I think I must have attended about 500 years ago when I look at what's happening these days. Because I'm encouraged by AI, I'm encouraged by technology, I'm encouraged by the drift of the world. But what struck me at times was the fact that AI has become so prominent. What about HI? Human intelligence. I have a slight fear that in the world we live in, we can use AI, advanced technology, and see remarkable achievements, whether it be medicine or anything else. But when I realise that we live in the United Kingdom and in Scotland, where 1 in 4 of our children live in poverty, how much is human intelligence worth at that point? Because they have to develop, they have to be given priority, and I can imagine in many, many households, if you don't have access to education, to HI, then we've got to be careful about where we're going. So I welcome entirely the drift of the modern world, and especially in this magnificent university and the work they're doing. But I would always like to retain in my memory and my thinking this question of human intelligence, because it links in with the whole idea of diplomacy. And when you think about education in that sense, it's very much linked to diplomacy, it's very much linked to dialogue and discussion. But then if you take the modern thrust of where we're going, which again I say I support, let's just accept that in the kind of world we're living in, I don't want to be robotized to the point where human discourse is disregarded. I say disregarded, it's a bit extreme, a bit wild for effect, but nevertheless, this is the kind of world that we live in. On the other hand, as a politician of something like 1,000 years now, I think I've been in politics, it seems to me that the world has problems. International order is in disarray. As someone described it, we have a confluence of calamities. We have an extraordinary assault on humanity. And we also have a bonfire of the truth, trust, tolerance. And of course, we have regional blocks in the world. So my first point is, especially for an international audience, I just simply believe that Europe, the EU, is Britain's future. It is certainly Scotland's future. And I would go as far as to say, being slightly controversial, that Brexit, for me and for Scots and for the British people now, was an act of insanity, for which we are taking a long time to recover. And there's no point in having, a dialogue where you kind of have so much nuance, you don't understand what people are talking about. I just think that in terms of Brexit now makes sense to some who supported it, but it makes no sense to me in a world where traditional allies have to be looked upon with some suspicion, where there are new emerging orders in terms of regional blocks within the world. And when you think about it in that way, it seems that Europe has to be the way forward. And the Europe of Monnet was one that you didn't build Europe in a day. It was incremental. We created one market, but now we need to create one immigration policy. We need to create a whole range of other social and diverse issues that brings the union together. And it's 27 countries now. But when you consider the relationships with North Africa and the Middle East, when you consider the countries that are in Europe but not in the EU, there's a huge potential here. Not to compete necessarily in military terms with everyone, but to actually believe in our collection of thoughts and ideas. And I'm conscious as a Scot that we played a great part in the Industrial Revolution. It didn't happen in America. We played a role in the Protestant Reformation. It didn't happen in America. And when you take the Enlightenment and the introduction in the Age of Reason, it didn't happen in America. So this is a speech which actually says that we have a great deal to be proud of as a group here, but I think there's much more to be addressed as we move forward. So that's why the idea of cultural diplomacy, talking to each other, becomes so important. And what I'd like to do very briefly, I've been looking at some work on the whole question of resilience, which taps into us because we're talking about resilient countries, resilient nations, resilient people. And there is no doubt that there is a debate about the quality of resilience that we currently have. But in terms of this group, I believe that you could look at resilience in this way. First of all, it's about the economy. Secondly, it's about constitution, democracy, and governance. It's also about interdependencies, which are crumbling in many ways. And the other issue, of course, it's about people. So if you have these four items or pillars, we can work with that. And that's why cultural diplomacy has such an impact, because it's about dialogue, it's about discussion, it's about people coming together, it's about common ends. And when you think we live in such a fractured planet, and there was a group called Dire Straits in the late 80s, that illustrates how old I'm getting, but they had a song, and the record was Brothers in Arms. And they made this simple point. We have but one world, but we live in different ones. And this is the issue of unity of purpose as a planet. And when you take some of the existential threats that we face, it's a question of fiddling while Rome burns, that the planet has problems maybe 100, 200 years ahead. What are we doing about it now? Some are doing a lot. But it's the one world idea. And it seems to me that that captures, in essence, what you are achieving, what you're trying to do, and what politicians in their better moments should be also attempting. But the interdependence is crucial, and that can happen at any level. And that's why I like to think that Scotland is an ancient nation of 1,000 years, but also a very ambitious nation. And that's why this example of the future here today is emblematic of the kind of country we want to be. But we have to have interdependencies with other countries, other nations, other groups, other cultures. Now, this may be a bit naive in the world of Xi Jinping speaking yesterday with 21 fellow travelers. It could be about the situation we have in the United States, where we're trying to question where are they going. And of course, in Europe, we have our problems ourselves. But without developing interdependencies, I just feel we're going to continue to be isolated. And it comes back, of course, to my crucial point that the European Union, Europe itself, is quite an institution. But on this question of education, I made the point, quite cynically at the start, I think, about HI and AI. But from the school level right through to adulthood, we have to be doing far more in education. Not about just bread and butter and local issues, in maths and physics and chemistry and science, but it's this humanity issue again. And I speak to a lot of students, a lot of young people. There is a fantastic promise in all of them. They're clearly at an age that maybe haven't been jaundiced or kind of poisoned by a lot of modern thinking. But nevertheless, what they're doing is that there is an interest in gaining knowledge, an interest about the world. And that's why I think we have to look to developing within any organization such as this whole question of education and what it means. But can I just maybe make a couple of references to why I think that Scotland hosting this today is a step forward for us. 25 years now we've had a Scottish Parliament. That was developed in 1997. I was involved in the legislation in 98, and the Parliament is 25 years old last year. Now, the benefit of that is that not only do we live in a United Kingdom, which is still highly centralised, we live in a world within nations which is highly centralised as well. It seems at times we don't trust people. Sometimes I think it's not very right to trust politicians, and I've been one for, I think, again, about 1,000 years. But it's this question of trust, and it's this question of young people, and it's this question of building from the base, building from the frame. And if we can again address that, we not only make interdependencies crucial, but we're also sending a message, a powerful message, that we need dialogue. And in politics in the UK, for example, we have Welsh colleagues here today. I don't know if there's anyone from Northern Ireland, but in terms of Scotland, we want to do better together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we only have one country in terms of the UK dictating or speaking down to these various bodies that we have. But often politics needs courage. And what we're finding these days is that there are big issues to be discussed, big issues to be tackled, but often we kind of slumber away from that because it could be conflict. That shouldn't be the case. Because one of the reasons for the world's in the mess it is in my view just now, is that it is great to have difference. Everybody here will have a view on something that may differ. We may have 40 or 50 different views. Difference drives discussion and thought, but division doesn't. And what you find in America and what you're finding in the UK and maybe in your own countries is the fact that difference is healthy. You may agree on something, I may differ, healthy debate follows. But once a difference becomes a division, you need a side. You need a party. You need to dislike what somebody's saying. That's worrying. And that's a critical point that organizations such as this can help to overcome. Promote difference, but beware of division. Now, is that so simplistic that it lacks any sense? I don't think so. Think about the world just now. Think about the UK. Think about your own countries. Think about America. The intransigence of people now on division. It's intolerance. It's the lack of compatibility. It's the lack of respect. And it's a simple point. Have difference, but don't turn it into a division, because that needs a posture. That needs a party. That needs for you to think things that you shouldn't be thinking in terms of this truth, trust, and tolerance issue. So Scotland is not unique in any particular way, but it does have a semblance of that collective responsibility that is good for us, and I think is good for most people. So all in all, what I've tried to do in that kind of brief contribution is to identify what I think is important to us, what I think is important to any organisation that wants to create dialogue and debate between nations, between cultures, between communities, vitally, vitally important. And this is a bit of kind of homespun philosophy. We have a poet in Scotland called Robert Burns. Revered. He was our man of the millennium, the most important Scot in terms of the public mind that's probably ever existed. That's quite an accolade. I'm sure I fall well short in terms of any potential future accolades. But the point about Burns was, somebody was talking earlier about, we're talking about where humanity is going. And Burns was essentially a poet. He had an amazing life, some of which we can't go into, a grown-up company. But nevertheless, he wrote a poem, a song, and it was called Is There for Honest Poverty? And he finishes that with the remarkable lines about the state. And he can talk about nature, he can talk about people. And he finishes with this comment, that man to man, the world o'er, shall brothers be for all that. Sadly, ladies, women weren't considered at that point, in the 18th century. Simple themes. And my instincts tell me some of the simple themes are the most important. The other one, which you'll know, is the International Song of Friendship, which he wrote. It's called Auld Lang Syne. It's the second most sung song in the world. And it was written in Ayrshire, in Scotland, by Robert Burns. And The previous one is Therefore Honest Poverty. That could be described as the Marseillaise of humanity. But the International Song of Friendship is Auld Lang Syne. Now, it's often good in these very sophisticated debates and discussions and robots and whatever that we forget some of the simple truths that should drive us as human beings. So I put Robert Burns up here because he had a grasp of nature, he had a grasp of the future, but nevertheless, he came up with some simple themes that I think that we can major on as we move through today, tomorrow, and to a future of further dialogue. So Tasmina, I think I should just say thanks for having me. I hope some of the points were of relevance as we move forward. And as I said, it's a personal honour to be involved with you. And let's tackle the future together. Thanks very much.